Imagine an airy workspace that feels like a modern oasis, or a cafe that's cosy and inviting, or a vibrant shopfront that draws customers in. Whatever space you're dreaming up, the IKEA Business Network is here to help you create a better everyday life at work. Join the IKEA Business Network for free and instantly access benefits including a one-on-one with an interior designer, member discounts and perks for your staff and family. So go on, join the IKEA Business Network now at ikea.com.au/business.
Hello and welcome to another episode of First Act, the podcast where we dive into the origin stories and inspirational journeys of Australia's most interesting entrepreneurs, business owners and influencers. I'm one of your hosts, Cess Busby, and my fun fact for today is my favourite kids movie is The Never Ending Story.
You must love Falcor then. I'm Adam Bubb, your other co-host for today. And my favourite kids movie would have to be The Lion King, which has actually just celebrated its 30th anniversary. And I'm talking about the original. Sorry to anybody who's like particularly great fan of the live action remake. It wasn't really for me. But anyway, was it for you, Cess?
No, to be honest, it wasn't actually. Didn't have the same depth of character in terms of the voiceovers. The voiceovers were just so great in that original movie. So many great actors, like even in the small parts, like Whoopi Goldberg as a hyena, like
Oh my
it
God.
just great actors.
Yeah.
So
And Elton John's music as well. But look, we could do a podcast just on The Lion King, but we've got a guest here with us today, a really special guest. Today we're thrilled to have somebody whose career has spanned film, television, and virtual reality. Angus Stevens is a Sydney-based father of two, CEO and founder of award-winning, internationally recognised virtual reality and augmented reality studio Start Beyond. They've developed virtual learning programs for the likes of Woolworths, St. John Ambulance, and SocialWise, a US program for teens and children with autism. He's also recently written his first book, Viewer Discretion Advised. Angus, welcome to First Act.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And I love how it kicks off with a film discussion.
it's right in your lane there, Angus.
It's in my sweet spot. Yeah.
What's your favourite kids' film?
Look, when you were saying that, I was thinking, I'd probably go Inconceivable. I'm going to put out The Princess Bride.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Oh, classic.
It's got its own little meta version of childhood classic as well. Within, story within a story, yada, yada. So, yeah.
So Angus, let's jump in. You've had a really interesting career to date. You've moved around quite a little bit, but let's go right back to the beginning. Let's start with that early life. What was it like for you growing up? Were you one of those kind of arty kids? Did you come from an arty family? Did movies and theatre play a big part in your life growing up?
Oh, it's so nice. Like you never. I very rarely get asked this question of like, what were you like as a kid? Usually it's all nuts and bolts and we're often running about business world. So it's a nice question to get, Sis. Look, I was one of those kids who like the arty kids thought was too sporty and the sporty kids thought was too arty, basically. So I love cricket and soccer and rugby and that sort of thing, and I love physical activity, and at the same time I was also a massive music nut and film nut and loved drama and all that sort of business. So yeah.
So what's the first movie you can remember seeing?
I remember seeing Benji.
the dog movie. Yeah.
And I remember when I saw like The Empire Strikes Back. I was too young for Star Wars, so I remember going to the movies and seeing The Empire Strikes Back. And honestly, it would have taken me at least 10 years before it occurred to me that those planets weren't real. Like I hadn't joined the dots of the idea that like that got made on Earth. I just thought, oh yeah, this is a film that
Like they definitely went to Tatooine or the planet Palpatine or
whatever teen it was, Ovaltine. It was I really thought it was real. So anyways,
it's a documentary. What are you talking about?
Exactly.
So was a career in filmmaking always on the cards then? You said you're not arty enough for the arty kids and not sporty enough for the sporty kids. What kind of generated your interest in filmmaking? Were there any particular moments that or influences in your childhood that led you that way?
I think it was just I always loved story. So, and at the time, growing up in the 90s, there was a real revolution in film, and there's indie films, and Rodriguez is putting out this book of like how he made a film for 9 grand, and goes on to make Desperado, and Tarantino's just suddenly appeared with this incredible film called Reservoir Dogs, and everyone's like, what the hell, it was such an exciting time for film, and I really reveled in the possibilities and excitement of that. Yeah.
So you have this dream of being a filmmaker or having some sort of involvement in the film industry. And what happens next? Did you study? Did you go to film school? What was that route that you took?
Well, I went, for for whatever reason, I rather than going to film school, I went and did an arts degree, and I studied English. And whilst I was doing that at Sydney Uni, which I absolutely loved, I got to direct theatre and, put on major productions at the Seymour Centre. In fact, what we put on was I reached out. I mean, I was so naive, but anyhow, I reached out to Cameron Crowe, who had written and directed Say Anything. And I said to him, it was so long ago, I had to fax his agent, but I faxed his agent saying, I would like to put on a production of Say Anything. Do you mind? And could we have like the shooting script? And bless his heart, he sure enough goes, yep, no problem, sends it over. And so that was the Suds major production at the Sydney Theatre, at the Seymour Centre. And we put on Say Anything as a play. And yeah, it was great fun. And the one thing he said, I just remembered, one thing he said was, happy to do it, but I want you to send me the poster. And I've still got the poster at home, and I still haven't bloody sent it. 50 million years later, it's on my to-do list.
When you get off this call, get that poster, put it in a post pack, send it off.
Yeah.
He's probably got a different agent now, but we'll get there eventually.
Yeah. I really should do that. I mean, God, yeah. Anyways.
So what was your first job in the business? Your first real job? You had these amazing experiences at uni, but what was your first breakthrough into the business?
So I had a gig, finished uni, and got a gig working at a company called National Books, and I was the assistant to the editor, and I was 20, 21, like young, dumb young. So anyhow, I was doing that, and I did it for 3 months, and I was just like, oh my God, this is killing me. I cannot do this. And went in and apologized and resigned, and went to London, and through, I don't know, happen chance, basically just got into an opportunity whereby I was working for an independent TV production company called Celandine. They were doing a thing with Bob Geldof, Planet 24, and before I knew it, they had me as their researcher, and I was going to LA, where I was their researcher on the ground, where the whole doco was around. It was a 6-part TV show around Totally California. It was when Clueless had come out. This is how long ago we're talking. And we were doing a doco comparing the LA teenagers with their real life counterparts. So like movie teenagers and then real life LA teenagers. And because I was young and stupid, they thought I'd be useful being able to like talk to teenagers. And so before I knew it, I was driving a BMW Z3 on the weekends, because that's what the host had when we were shooting. And when she wasn't using it, I got to use it. And Swan about LA. So that was my first real gig. So yeah, what the hell?
That is wild. Beverly Hills 90210 in for real. Like
Yeah.
you got to see that real side.
Yeah.
I guess like being a young Aussie out there on the world stage, like that's living the dream. Was it really competitive around that time? Did you start to feel that competition as more Aussies have kind of come into the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it was like it was fascinating in London, because I'd never, like, as an Australian, you go over there, and in a way, I just jumped the queue. Like all these English prejudices that they have towards their fellow countrymen, they just didn't have towards like an Aussie kid just rocking up. And so I felt like I really jumped the queue in that regard, and just the sort of uncluttered nature of, you know, both my upbringing and childhood and personality, I guess, meant that it just sort of was off and running, and you know, it seemed pretty straightforward somehow. And then once you're in LA, like, it was still, I mean, I remember flatmates just giggling because I was ordering Mexican food and I was calling it a jalapeno, and it's like, and they were like, so, you know, it's pretty ridiculous.
Did they serve you with a bit of a smirk, or?
But when it was like, I mean, it was like I was ringing up to get like home delivery, and they're like, "You want a what? What do you want? You want a what?" And so yeah, I was like, "Jalapeno, jalapeno pepper? Like, we don't have those."
Oh, jalapeno.
Jalapeno. Exactly.
Yeah. So, what do you think you really took away from that time in terms of your filmmaking and the influences and what you were experiencing at that time? Because it must have been pretty heady, and you were surrounded by all these amazing people and really learning stuff on the job. What do you
Mm.
think you learnt from that?
I think the thing that I learned more than anything else was that to just back yourself. You know, not to second guess, just like, you know, to just, if you've got to do a task, just work out a way to do the task. Like, all people want is just for the job to get done. So don't seek permission. Just work out the way they want you to get, you know, like, you know, some of the jobs that I had were bizarre. Like, okay, we need to find a teenage mum. Go find a teenage mum, you know? And so it's like, okay, well, how do I do that? So then I find that there's a school, you know, that's not part of the valley, but it's outside, and in that school they have, like, you know, 3 different schools going simultaneously because they have so many students in that area. And then within that there's a creche, and so it's like, oh, they've got a creche, and it's like, that's where the babies of all the teenage moms are going, so that those girls can still get an education. So I was like, all right, well, there we go, there's the teenage mom. What else have you got? Like, you know. And so it was that, you know, just work it out and come up with a solution and get on with it. That's what I learned, because that's what the producers wanted. So, you know, and I wanted the job, so I just was like, okay, I'll do that.
You mentioned Bob Geldof before. You've worked with a number of big names. You've had, I know, Gaga, Ed Sheeran. I mean, these are, you know, the peak of the peak. Can you share any memorable moments from those experiences, or anything, or any people in particular that stood out to you? How, watching how they worked as well.
Yeah. I mean, so in my job working at Austereo, I was like it was early days of video, and so it's a radio company stepping into the digital world, and so we really had an opportunity to write the rule book. It was a really innovative time, and it was a lot of fun. And the reason why I pivoted into playing in that space was because sort of, I think it was around the year 2000, and a mate of mine who was a screenwriter, and he'd written a bunch of feature films, and they'd gotten up and all the rest, and he said, oh, well, you know, that film's dead. Like, you know, we've missed the golden age, and this whole online thing's going to be where it's at. And if you actually want to hit scalable audiences and really have creativity where you're off and running and playing, then digital's where to go. And that was a bit of a light bulb moment, because I was like, well, I want to be part of something new. I don't want to be at the end of a media. I want to be at the front of the, you know, the new media. And so that's why I then took the gig at Austereo, where I was basically heading up their online video department within a newly formed digital team. And it meant that music labels were trying to work out how they could find a new touch point for audiences, and with that, and record companies and radio stations are all looking at, well, how do we use this new medium? So it meant, yeah, I got to meet, you know, a whole bunch of folks who are super talented and super, like, you know, like, the first time I interviewed Lady Gaga was underneath the stairs, because no one thought she'd amount to much. And the woman who was my boss, Emily Rayner, was smart enough to go, she will be massive and you need to film her. And then I then delegated it to this other guy, because I was busy doing something else, whatever the hell it was, I do not know. And so Jason went off and interviewed her, and then I sort of stuck my head in just to check that it was going okay, because Jason barely knew how to use a video camera at that stage, and sure enough, he was killing it. And he came away and I was like, oh, how was that? And he's like, she's amazing. Like, she's incredible. And the next time that we then interviewed her, it was 3 years later. It wasn't underneath the stairs. It was the top penthouse suite at the Hilton. And she had the whole floor, and we had 3 different cameras going, and it was an amazing transformation. And she was so on point. Like, I was monitoring the camera and getting the camera operators to frame up, and she'd said she only wanted wide shots, and I just was like quietly getting one of the camera operators to push in to get a close-up of her. She wanted to show off her dress, and she had sunnies on, and she continues the interview, but whilst doing that is watching the monitor and can see the angle that I've gone, and actually pause the interview to say, no, that's too close, sorry, pull out. And I was like, wow, like, you are on it. Like, I was so impressed. I mean, there's so many super talented people, but yeah, I mean, she was sharp. And the thing that I learned within all of that was that the more talented you are, the more confident you are in your own ability, the less diva.
Yeah, that's so true. Unless you swing the other way, you're total diva.
Yeah.
But I think Seth and I can both relate to this because we've both worked in entertainment journalism and interviewed
Mm,
a lot of
mm,
different famous people ourselves, and
Mm.
you do encounter people, and I mean often it's their teams that are quite difficult to deal with, and they
yeah.
themselves are quite amazing when you meet them. You say, oh, there's a reason why this person has that X factor. I think I mean this is a
Who's
bit.
the person that you've had where you've gone, wow?
Look, I feel like I talk about her on every week on this podcast, and I think Seth knows what I'm about to say. Taylor Swift.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and she was just incredible, extremely down to earth, and really just wanted to have a normal conversation with someone, because I think a lot of her world was this is about 10 years ago, it was very much, those junkets and those days of media are
Yeah,
exhausting.
yeah.
Anyway, this podcast isn't about me. This is about you, Angus.
I always find it interesting. So, right.
But
Yeah,
that's a story for another day, Seth. Maybe we should do a first act on each other at some point.
Oh, I've got too many stories that can't be shared.
Oh, NDAs. That's right.
Oh,
Plenty of NDAs. Look,
Uh,
this is a bit of a shift in tone, but look, it really does sort of represent the kind of shift that your career has sort of taken, and I guess really why we've been talking so much about where you were before and what that led you to, because there was a bit of kind of a turning point in your life. There was a hang gliding accident. That must have been a really intense experience. Can you just take us through what happened?
yeah. I mean, it's yeah. Look, I mean, it, the simplest way to put it is we're up in Byron Bay and doing a tandem hang glide. I'm not an adventurous guy. Like, it's not, but I just like the idea of kites, and I think they're kind of cool. And I thought this would be kind of fun. It was just the day of, right around my 32nd birthday. So I think it was 2 days before my birthday. And tandem hang glider. So the idea is that you're in a sleeping bag kind of thing, and the main guy is on the hang glider, and then I'm in the sleeping bag. But he doesn't attach my sleeping bag to the hang glider. So we take off, and I'm just holding my hands, realizing I'm not attached. And it's this ramp that's up near the lighthouse at Byron Bay on the headland. And I just have one of these moments where it's like, okay, I've just got to let go. Like, let go, not just physically, but like emotionally, psychologically. This is it. Like, I've just got to let go. Like, I'm done. And yeah, you have this whole thing. Like, my mind just went into overdrive, and I remember this guy at uni who'd been so drunk he'd fallen 3 stories, but because he passed out because he was so drunk, when he hit the ground, he survived. And yeah, I remember remembering that, and I remember just going in this moment of letting go, and seeing my whole life literally, flash before me. I've just got to kind of consciously knock myself out, and so anyhow, they found me at the bottom, on the sort of gravelly headland and so on, slumped around a little bit of shrub, and they expected to, just be taking the body back to up the hill. And miraculously, I think the reason why I survived was because I did do that. I did sort of let go on every sense of the word.
I cannot believe that you were literally holding on and then just went,
Yeah. I don't know if you guys remember that film With Nail and I, like, but in it, like,
"Oh,
yeah, okay. And he's like super bent. And the guy is like, okay, you're like on a balloon, like, you're holding onto the balloon. How high will you go before you let go of the balloon? And it's that sort of ridiculousness, but on a much more serious level. That was just like, the longer I hold on, the higher I'm going to go, the further I'm going to fall. Yeah,
yeah,
this is not going to work.
yeah." Yeah, was there not a thought like, "Oh, if I get out over the ocean, if I fall, it will be better?"
Oh man, I'm not that strong. No, I was just like, "What the fuck? Ah, I'm gonna die." It was hideous. Yeah.
Oh, terrible. So they found you. They obviously rushed you to hospital. I imagine there were months and months of, rehab and recovery for you. So I remember, hearing that, when you were spending all that time in hospital, it actually opened your eyes to what people really value in life and what you value in life.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I think that everything that had led to that point was aligned with sort of my values about that you can't control life anyway, and that choice to let go was reflective of this whole thing of that, life's just a ride, and you've just got to go with the flow and try to shape it as much as you can, but at the same time, the more you try to control something, the less control you have, kind of thing. So I already had that sort of philosophy, but the thing that really stayed with me when I was recovering, it was in Tweed Heads Hospital. I was in a ward with four other blokes, and they were all like, if not at the end of their life, then pretty close. And if they were going to leave the ward, then they'd be coming back. Like, it was getting near the business end of life, basically. And I was the kid who's like 32 with his partner and little toddler, and Sammy's pregnant with our second child and all the rest. And all of these blokes talked about, they didn't talk about work. As they talked about their life, the only thing that mattered to them at all was the people they loved. And that was it was a great privilege to be able to see that and realize that, yeah, that's all that really matters.
I guess in that moment, that sort of, in terms of your founder story with Start Beyond, that was a like, pretty formative moment in what kind of drove you to go, you know what, I wanted some kind of change in what I'm doing. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the timeline of it all was like not as clearly sequential as what you're describing, but the essence of it very much so. Like the reality of it was that I was still at a point where I had to navigate being a father and having two kids, and my wife remains in the film industry, and so she was a producer, and so she's an independent film producer, and we're in our 30s, and got two kids. So I worked at organizations and large companies with the idea of being able to understand how they work, so that then when the day came when I had enough nous to be able to strike out on my own, then I understood both how a small business worked and how a big business worked, so that I could navigate both. And it then meant that I think that when the opportunity did arise, and and I was able to jump ship, that I did it knowing that it was for all the right reasons, and with the right lens. Well, I mean, everyone's got different reasons, and right and wrong's kind of immaterial. That's not what I mean by right reasons. I just mean reasons that were aligned with what I knew was important to me, and the privilege of being able to have a life whereby I was going to do the things that were important to me. Like, I could make a buck out of it and have it be aligned with my own personal values, and take on board what I learned from that hospital ward.
I guess, that was a pivotal turning point moment, but you had other stuff that you needed to do before you could embark on your own business journey.
Yeah, I mean, something like that just stays with you. It stays in your soul, and it shapes you in a way that is so core that it's only now that I actually talk about
You can see that it's still a really raw experience even
it.
though it was some years ago, like, it obviously would be anything where there's that near death
Yeah, it's pretty
experience.
nuts, but hey.
Yeah. All right, Angus, we'll be back to learn more about Angus Stevens' first act after this very short break.
Need to refresh your workspace? Want discounts for your business, your staff, and your family? The IKEA Business Network is here to help you create a better everyday life at work. Join the IKEA Business Network and instantly access a range of exciting benefits tailored to your unique business needs. It's free to join, and you get access to quick fix design tips, member discounts, and some amazing perks for your people at over 400 retailers. Join the IKEA Business Network now at ikea.com.au/business.
So, Angus, jumping forward to Start Beyond, your new venture, that's already achieved so much since you began. You've delivered over, I think, 1.2 million AR and VR learning experiences since you started the company. So, but first, before we go into that, can you tell our listeners a bit more about AR and VR and what that means? Everyone's AI at the moment, but AR and VR.
It's actually
Yeah.
refreshing not to be talking about AI for once.
Yeah, so I mean, the easiest way to describe it, like virtual reality, you chuck on the VR headsets, you're totally immersed. You got the goggles on, you can't see a single thing aside from what's on the screen in front of you in this very closed off environment. The beauty of that is that it allows you to be transported to anywhere, and so you can transform the classroom by putting on the VR headset, and then suddenly you're in a totally different environment. You can use virtual reality to shift perspective because you can have scenarios play out whereby you're engaging with someone and they're behaving or treating you in as an individual that's totally different to what your own age, cultural background, education, etc., may well be. And so it allows you to shift perspectives and get a greater sense of empathy and understanding of other points of view through putting on the VR headset. It also allows you to visualize concepts a lot faster because you can experience stuff in a virtual environment without the physical or emotional risk. And so all of these things make VR a very compelling and interesting format. And it's been used in entertainment, but I find it particularly interesting within training and learning because it kind of hooks back to those points we were talking about before, like of doing work that is valuable and meaningful. And so you can actually use this to help frontline workers navigate how to deal with an aggressive customer, or a carer who's got a bloke who's got dementia, and suddenly the old bloke with dementia is cracking the shits at you because he can't find his watch. But you do it in VR and you learn how to help calm him down so that he doesn't have to just take medication 24/7 to navigate his dementia. So there's real world value to it.
I imagine they could use it in HR as well to kind of stop unconscious bias, maybe like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So microaggressions in the workplace, unconscious bias, all these sort of things. Coming from a storytelling and film background, like, there's so much tech out there, and being able to use the tech, like lots of tech people get excited about the tech. What I get excited about is how you can actually move people and start to think and feel and experience life in a different way through the tech. And so that's why I'm into virtual reality. Yeah.
It's fascinating because I think that on the outside, somebody who doesn't know, if somebody comes into this conversation is like, okay, you know what, I know nothing about VR and AR, that's not my world. It's actually a deeply human and deeply emotion based and behavioral based kind of discipline that you're talking about. Like, we talked a lot about story and how storytelling is really where your passion comes from. Like, this kind of work isn't merely technology. It isn't merely just simulations. It has to be infused with how people react and respond to things for them to be able to learn things. So I think
Yeah.
it's quite powerful.
Yeah. 100%. Absolutely, Adam. Yep, totally. And so, and to the sort of part B of like what augmented reality is, like, so if you've got VR, you're putting on the goggles, you're totally immersed. The beauty of AR is that it's supplementing your existing environment with additional information. And so where that gets interesting is if you've got objects or screens or sort of locations where people aren't necessarily engaging with them because they don't understand the merit or the value of it, then the beauty of AR is it adds a whole other layer to that environment, and so can then supplement the real world with additional information, and with that additional information comes, new ways of being able to engage. So case in point, we did this piece for ANSTO, which, it was 150 years of the periodic table being invented. And so, yeah, and so there's like a poster that all the high school students have in their science classroom around the periodic table, but no one cares less about it. And so what we did is we made an AR piece whereby you scan the periodic table with your mobile phone, and then all the different elements that relate to nuclear science suddenly pop out as 3D forms. And you can then discover stuff like potassium has radioactivity in it, and when you eat a banana, you're eating radioactivity. So yeah,
It really does bring things to life. It's amazing when you talk about. Your client base are huge. You've got Accenture, Meta, Woolies. We talked about Woolies. What are some of the key lessons you've learned from those collaborations? Because they would all come with really different needs, wouldn't they?
yeah. So my gig, it's kind of like, that sort of that ship that sails into port, and and each major company that you're dealing with is a different port, and the company culture is different, and you walk into a room and very quickly you can tell whether what the sort of emotional barometer of the company is like, just by the people that you're dealing with and how they respond to each other. And so I find that a really interesting, like, separate to my job and the work that we do, I find it really interesting just being able to have the freedom to meet these different organizations and see how they operate, both structurally and at an interpersonal level, and then as a sort of client relationship level as well. Yeah, it's fascinating because VR and AR are industry agnostic. The principles behind what makes them useful, you can use across any industry. So it gives us great freedom in the different companies that we get to meet with.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, like how much of it is you walk into the situation with these big companies and they're looking to you for how do we solve this problem? How do we make this more interesting? How can we use VR or AR to, you know, d- deal with a customer's issue or highlight something that's really important to us? Is it like that? Is it you're like, as well as being the storyteller of the product, you're also the technical expert?
Yeah, I mean, I always revert back to the principles behind what makes VR and AR useful, and use that as the starting point. And invariably, the way that it'll play is that there's people within an organization who have positioned themselves as the innovators and the forward thinkers, and they bring value to the organization by being that. But then there's also the other folks within the organization who are wanting to make sure that there's runs on the board, or there's measurable ROI, or there's metrics that they can then use, so that it's not just some hype cycle thing, of which that skepticism is healthy and warranted. So the beauty of my job is being able to support the innovators, educate those who aren't necessarily as au fait with it. And ultimately, what you want to do is you want the people who aren't necessarily in those initial conversations wanting to get on board or are skeptical about it, you want them to become your advocates. So, because the minute those guys become your advocates, you're off and running. So I always read the room, try to find the skeptics, and then what is it that they don't like? Why are they skeptical? What's the problem? And do how can I help them? And if I can help them, then they'll do their job better, and therefore this thing will fly.
That is such a good lesson for anybody who ends up in these boardroom meetings that are very, very daunting. Like, yeah, you do actually have to be able to find those people who are, you to turn them into brand advocates, and that's kind of the dream, isn't it? You want to get these people buzzing about you. I know that one of the other areas that has sort of there's a lot of interest in at the moment is retail, and you kind of mentioned it before. Like there's been a lot of kind of rise in incidents of customer aggression and that kind of thing. How do you hope that you're able to make a kind of impact in these areas, and how much work needs to be done?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack within all of that. It's pretty intense what's going on in the moment, and I think a lot of it stems from, like, at a societal level, like frontline workers are facing more and more aggressive behavior, and there's we could dive into why that's the case, but that would be a different podcast. I think that what in my role, what I'm seeing is organizations are basically trying to work out ways to support their workforce. Their workforce is increasingly fatigued, increasingly having struggles around resilience and having the mental strength to deal with a continually hostile customer base. And so what we're looking to do particularly within VR, is to be able to create scenarios that replicate the emotional and physical risk that these frontline workers might go through. And by doing it in VR, give them a trial run and a sort of playground to be able to see how, depending on how they respond to different scenarios, can either escalate or de-escalate the situation. And so if you're able to help people understand what is going to be a catalyst for greater anger versus something that will help calm that customer down, then ultimately that's going to make your job easier and your mental health that little bit stronger, and you'll feel a little bit more empowered to be able to navigate, difficult situations. And whether that be psychological harm because of a verbally abusive customer, or physical harm from someone, physically harming you, there's ways of being able to use virtual reality to equip people with the skills they need to mitigate that, or at least put themselves out of harm's way.
Yeah, the bit that you're talking about there, the skills that people need, there's so much onus now on business leaders and business owners to actually take care of their teams and make sure that people are, not only enjoying their work, but they're emotionally prepared for their work, and that, levels of risk are mitigated. What do you think makes for a good small business leader? Because I know you were also named last year among one of the top 50 small business leaders. So what what um what do you make of that accolade for a start? But also, what's good leadership to you, and should we all be looking after our teams?
Well, look, I mean, well, okay. So good leadership is, I think, just being authentic, like, and holding yourself and those around you to account in a way that's genuine, like, and so if people know what is important within their role, and if people know uh, that if they deliver to those things, then they're doing a good job, and that's what counts, and there's respect and there's trust and there's authenticity, then you're off and running. I mean, at the end of the day, everyone just wants to be able to bring, like, one of the guys who's just started with us, I caught up with him, and he used to work with us ages ago, and then he's come back, which is absolutely brilliant. It's so good to have him back. And he was saying, the thing that I love about working at Start is that I don't have to bring a mask to work. I can just be myself here. And that is the whole point. I think good leadership is allowing people to be themselves and to feel empowered to do their work and take pride in their work, but also not have to do some bloody bullshit corporate dance, like, but I know that has to exist in other environments. I'm just thankful that we've been able to create one whereby we don't have to have
Yeah.
that.
And what about that old, work-life balance thing that everyone's banging on about? How is yours? How's your work-life balance? Because it seems that this, although probably not as fast-paced as the film and the music industry that you were in, it's probably still pretty fast-paced with quite a bit of pressure. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, when you run your own business, like, the beauty of corporate world is that, there's other people who have to take ownership of other stuff. And the pro of that is that, you don't have to, you don't, the business doesn't solely rely on you. The con is that there may be machinations of a political nature that play out. That means, irrespective of how good you are at your job, you get knifed anyway. That's just part and parcel of life. But the beauty of when you run your own business is that, if I bugger it up, and there's been times where it was tough, so it's on me to be able to navigate those client relationships and to ensure that we create good work, and that the work is well received, and then results in further work and the basic economics of that. So there's something very empowering about that, but it's also, there's pressure that's associated with that. And so I find, to have that balance, it's really important, and I encourage everyone at Start Beyond to do this as well, is to have projects that live outside of your work job life, and to have things that nurture. And often people will talk about, I've got a side hustle. I'm not talking about it has to be a side hustle where you have to make extra bucks. I'm talking about you got to do something that invigorates you outside of your work, that you care deeply about, because that energy will then infuse back into your work, and vice versa. And and so, like, it's great. A bunch of the devs have got their projects that they're building, their games that they're building on the side in addition to what they're doing, and they get excited about that, and things that they learn from that job they can then bring into the work they're doing at the start, and vice versa. And we're interested to know how it's going and all that sort of business. Others are like building out a graphic novel, or making like a short film, or what have you. And for me, like, being CEO and continually bloody talking and having lots of plates spinning, and having this collaborative nature, for me it was very much about writing a book, because writing a book is just you and a piece of paper, and it's a very solo piece, and it just meant that I could just express myself in a very private way, um, rather than the collaborative work, which I love doing as well. But I feel like you need to be able to nurture yourself by having more than just one aspect to what you're doing. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's a different creative avenue. I mean, your book, it's a fiction novel, so you're kind of escaping the I suppose, like, in a lot of the worlds that you're in when you're creating these scenarios, these simulations in your training, you're dealing with a lot of things that happen in real life. But when it comes to creating a story, it's a different outlet completely.
Yeah.
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 So, what was the actual inspiration for viewer discretion advised?
Well, so basically, there's the adage, write what you know. And I think that's a pretty good bet. I came up with the idea of this guy coming back. He's stuck at the airport, and he discovers that there's an app that allows you to be in your favorite films. And he's like, oh my God, like, it's like a pre-entertainment app at the airport, like, when you're waiting around, you're bored. And he downloads, and he's like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so he's off and running, and he's in this app, and he can be the main character. He can be a romantic lead, and he's super excited, and he's loving it. And then he discovers he can't get out. And then it just goes from there.
Wow.
Oh, trapped in an alternate reality.
Sounds like it might be inspired somewhat by the work that you're doing.
Yeah, well, yeah. Somewhat inspired, Adam.
Look, that's probably that's your next act.
Angus, I think we've got time for just one last question. So, what I'd like to ask is, what, given all your years of experience across so many different types of businesses, is the one piece of advice you'd like our listeners to take away with today?
Yeah, I think my advice would be, like, particularly within the tech space, but I think you've got to listen. You've got to listen. You've just got to listen. You've got to listen to the market. You've got to listen to the people that you're pitching to. You've got to listen to those folks who say, oh, what about? And you don't have to do everything. Like, strategy is choosing what not to do. Strategy is choosing what not to do. And I fundamentally believe that. Like, and that I was told that a long time ago, and I've learned it every day. But in parallel with that phrase is, you've got to listen. And I think a lot of people get set on an idea, and they're not listening to those around them who are in various ways saying, well, what have you thought about? And if you don't listen to people, then you won't make your product valuable to other people, because you haven't listened to what their needs are. And so it doesn't matter what you're doing, you've got to listen to that market, and work out, okay, so here's my idea, but how does it work in relation to the people who I want to sell it to? And am I listening to that market? Am I taking on board the feedback that I'm getting from my colleagues, or from my clients? And am I really listening to that? Because if you don't, then you'll just barrel off down some pathway, and before you know it, you'll be struggling.
I think that's actually great advice, and probably not just for business, also in life. Listen more than you speak. And on that note, I'm going to stop speaking. It's been actually really wonderful having you on the show today and listening to your journey. Thank you so much for joining us, Angus.
Oh, it's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you both. I really enjoyed it. It's fun.
You've opened my mind up so much to the possibilities of what VR and AR can do. So I'm really curious to see where it takes us next. So thank you so much. And of course, our listeners, First Act, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and join us next time for more inspiring, interesting stories from Australia's finest entrepreneurs and influencers.
See you next time.